Hey everybody, so for today's video I'm going to share with you several religious and spiritual encounters that I believe that I have had on LSD and psilocybin. And this is a pretty interesting subject for me because I don't consider myself religious. Yet every single time that I take a high dose of psilocybin or LSD, I find myself cast into a world of religious symbology, sacred meaning, and many things that I would associate with a spiritual or religious dimension. And so what I'm going to do is just talk about some specific encounters that I have had mostly on high dose psilocybin experiences, and maybe we can find some similarities or differences between our trips. And I think we might find a lot of information by investigating that way. Let's jump right into it. So basically what I find myself doing every single time that I have a high dose psychedelic experience is just be stripped completely bare. And what I mean by that is all my coping mechanisms and all my filters for how I perceive reality, how I perceive myself in this world and my place in it, what my room means in my house, all of those things are stripped and thrown away. And so what high doses of psilocybin do are cast you into a chaotic landscape. And when you're cast into that chaotic landscape, you're basically grasping for absolutely anything. And for me personally, what I find myself grasping for are archetypes, are these heroic figures and symbols that seem to exist even after I've been stripped bare. And so I think that might have something to do with why these religious experiences begin after you've just basically been wiped out by these psychedelics. Now, as far as I understand it, our brain is trying to be as efficient as possible at all times. And so what that means is the things that we're processing are not everything that is going on. What I've learned recently is that psilocybin in particular deactivates something called a default mode network in our mind. And what that does is allow the brain to not be in such an energy conserving state. And so that's what immediately unsettles me, because it's one thing to say that these things that I'm about to describe are delusions and fantasy, but it's another thing to have a hypothesis that these substances deactivate a region in our brain that allows our brain to filter less. And so the thought that we're actually able to perceive another layer of reality that is being conserved just to save energy. And yet these psychedelic chemicals can basically turn the lock and let us use that energy. Because if that's true, who knows what the ramifications are of that. All right, the last thing before I actually get into these specific encounters is that I'm very aware how easy it is to dismiss these. I dismiss them myself most of the time. But what I'm going to tell you is that what you're going to realize after you do your first high dose of psilocybin, most likely at least, is that all of your beliefs about, let's say, how normal the world is, like the fact that you're not actually able to communicate with trees, all of that is based on your own personal experience. And so as smart and rational as you think you are, and I'm speaking to myself here, as intellectual as you may think you are, all your beliefs are based around your experiential evidence. And so when you take a high dose of psilocybin and then you're actually speaking to a tree, it's not as absurd anymore. And so I just want you to understand that I know how easy it is to be skeptical of every single thing I'm about to say, and you really shouldn't believe it literally. But understand that if you were put in this same scenario, it's highly likely that you would now believe that it's possible to intercommunicate between plants. And now maybe that just can be a perfect segue into my first experience. Something that happens very, very often for me when I take high doses of psilocybin is I feel as though I have the ability to intercommunicate with plants. Now I know how crazy that sounds. I absolutely know it. Yet I cannot shake this feeling that when I am on high doses of psilocybin, there is like an ethereal presence that comes from plants that you can perceive. And that could be, of course, delusion. That could be, of course, you just wishing that to be the case and assuming it. But strangely enough, when I gave it to my younger sister, she's about 19 years old and definitely doesn't have these highfalutin psychedelic ideas. When I gave her her first 5-gram mushroom dose, she stayed outside in my backyard for 3 to 4 hours late at night, crying, looking at tall trees. Now, that's where I start to get freaked out, when effects are reproducible, because now of course, this isn't rigorous scientifically, but we're starting to approach the scientific method when random people are taking substances and having similar experiences. Now, of course, again, you can say this is actually just a mass delusion. The effect of psilocybin in the brain causes people to hallucinate that they can communicate with plants. But if we're being open-minded about this, perhaps there is something we don't fully understand about the nature of consciousness. All right, let's move on to something only slightly less strange. And that is that once on a Tinder date, when I was taking about 5 to 6 grams of psilocybin, I had powerful, powerful visions of the divine woman. And I don't know what that means, but when I was laying with this woman on my bed and we were cuddling, so to speak, I had just such strong imagery of the divinity of the woman and the role that has played across time. And maybe that doesn't sound religious or spiritual to you, but when something is embodied, it feels a lot different. I felt in my bones the sacredness of the divine woman. And that is, I'm not sure what that symbol represents. I couldn't tell you, but what I can tell you is that as I was laying with this girl on my bed, I just was having just ridiculous visions of basically these beautiful Renaissance paintings of women. And so do with that what you will, but I just wanted to get that out there. The next strange phenomenon that happens in the spiritual domain on high doses of psilocybin again is something I call the split psyche. And maybe a psychologist can explain this better, but basically what it is the feeling that you're communicating in your mind with somebody that is not you. And so now again, maybe a psychologist will say that's actually an unconscious area of your brain that you're communicating with, and that's why it feels like an other. And that's possible, of course. But what I'm going to tell you is that it doesn't feel like somebody else in your mind. It feels like a distinct stranger. And this was also interesting when I took LSD, because the things that I was seeing, the art, the architecture, the religious symbology, none of those things I felt that I really had primed in my imagination. Again, you can call me out here and say, no, you saw it and you forgot. But I'm going to tell you that I personally believe that many of the things, like say the images of what I can only call the Virgin Mary or Mayan type architecture that I really had no understanding of, was forming so rapidly in front of me that it felt as though I had this creative force in my mind that I was not associated with. It was something completely foreign to me. And so the split psyche phenomenon is basically the feeling that you're interacting with something either in the environment or in your mind that is not you. And everybody who hasn't done mushrooms, and maybe even some who have, are going to say, dude, it's you, you're talking to yourself. But again, I'm going to refer to the experiential thing that happens, and you feel this way, and so you start to embody it and you start to believe it. And so let's just move on to the next thing. The next thing that's very strange in the sacred domain that happens on high doses of psilocybin is this call to nature. It's this deep embodied feeling that we need to return to a state that is not what is going on currently. Now, for me, that manifested as wanting to be barefoot, have a bow and arrow, and basically just walk down the beach and be an ape again. It made me want to shed my clothes and just stop faking this entire thing that's going on. But basically, that's how I can describe it, is that it's this revival of the primitive urge in man, and it's this profound, embodied in both mind and body feeling that it's time to return to nature. And so I don't know if anybody else has had that experience, but it's certainly a very, what I would call, sacred encounter that I've had many times on psychedelic mushrooms. Another really strange thing that's happened to me on psychedelics, specifically psilocybin in high doses, is this feeling that I need to worship my ancestors. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked in a mirror on psychedelic mushrooms above 5 grams, but all I can see is the product of evolution. Like, all I can see is the lineage of men and women that have sacrificed day in and day out to get the species to you today. I feel this profound strength and revitalization by making contact with what feels like the ancestral spirit. It feels like all your forebears are behind you and hopefully supporting you. Or maybe sometimes I would say, for example, sometimes on trips I felt like I'm disappointing them, I'm being a coward, I'm not living up to the potentiality of all the sacrifices that have been made for hundreds of thousands of years. And I know that I'm getting very strange here, but I just thought that this topic was so fascinating because I don't often think this way when I'm sober. I just find myself, when I'm on high doses of psilocybin, I find myself in this worship-like state of the people that got me to the place I am today. I find myself looking at my body and absolutely marveling that I even exist, that the ape that I am can function with all the complex networking system of blood vessels going on. I know that I'm rambling here. I hope you don't mind too much, but I'm going to move on to the final thing here, and that's a spiritual experience that I would call the encounter with mortality. And this is not your everyday remembering that you're going to die. This is the deep, deep remembrance that your date is set. That one day you are going to fade into oblivion and then be consumed by the earth around you and possibly everything will go black, and you might need to deal with that. And so I think there's a few different dimensions of this this spiritual experience. There's the feeling of, like I said, being crushed by this reality, let alone when you realize that your friends and family are going to be victims to this as well. But there's also this resurgence that occurs, this wish to fight back against this force that you will not beat. And I only call it a spiritual experience because it was like a transcendent burning in my chest, where I realized that I was gonna keep going forthright in the world despite that fact. So those are a few of some of my pretty out there things that have occurred to me on psilocybin in high doses and LSD to some degree. But I think what I've learned most about this from all these different trips that I've had and all the experiences is that the root of the human psyche is one layered with symbols and heroic figures. It's not something that you can separate yourself from, even though you think you can. When everything is stripped bare from you and reality becomes extremely complex and something that you as a little human cannot deal with, you're going to find yourself grasping towards your culture's, for lack of a better term, archetypes of divine figures who transcend that, because it's like nothing else is left. And so, of course, I'm just speaking about my opinion here. I'm not trying to tell anybody that their trip is going to go that way or that that's the only way a trip can go. But for me, high doses of psilocybin produce very spiritual experiences. I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed putting my thoughts together on some of these experiences that I've had. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe, and that would really help my little channel. Also, if you're interested in these topics on psychedelics or growing or anything related to a psychedelic experience, I'm going to leave a link below to my Discord, where we currently have about, 35 people who are all sharing similar interests, and we just kind of chat about stuff. So feel free to come and join that. That'd be pretty cool. And subscribe again if you enjoyed this content. I'll see you guys later.